And yeah, and there are also some other great features here. We have as well the config files. It's something that we also shipped in beta 6. We no longer need to do specifically if we're going and join a network. We don't actually need specifically to tell it to connect. We also have these config files. They'll be included on the projects. And you can also say automatically start network. You set it to true. So what does this mean? You run the application, it'll go through these config files, and they're like, oh, start network? All right, I got it. And it'll just join your network without without having to reconnect or without having to explicitly tell the device to join your network. And another also interesting, cool thing is Ntp servers. So this means that when you're running the application, not only you'll join the network, you'll be able to query an Ntp server, which is a network time protocol communication, and you'll also get your time, your local time, and set it on your board. So right out the gate, you do datetime.now, and you'll get the current time and date without having to query a web service, which is what I was doing before. So
that is beautiful, and it's almost as if we planned that to move into our next talk, which is could be all about networking and Mabel. Thank you. That's perfect.
Awesome.
That's a beautiful segue. I think we're good for questions for Bluetooth, but keep them coming. We'll have some time over the break as well to dive into more questions. But yeah, let's continue on that conversation around networking, and we're going to show you a couple things. We're going to talk a little bit about how we just use the networking APIs, and then talk about how we can host a lightweight HTTP server right on your Meadow board, and that is Maple. So let's, I'm all about the code, so let's jump into the code. Get my screen shared here again. And I've got back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to use the other project. We're going to use the HackKit project. And just as a reminder, I'm going to find my window here. So here I've got, this is the HackKit version of Klima. We saw this earlier. We've got the display, a couple buttons, and our analog temperature sensor. I'm going to use this as the foundation for some of our tests here. And we can actually, well, let's just jump into the APIs. So this is a .NET platform. We're using Mono. We've got the .NET runtime. It is full .NET. And so as you expect, you get to use .NET networking APIs. And I'm going to, let's go to the climate service here. This is a great one to start with. So this is an example in the Pro project. It might be actually in both, and I'll have a look. I think it is in both projects. The service access layer, yes. And this is a lightweight example of using networking APIs that works with the companion app. We've got a mini server here. And so in this case, what we would do is we would put in the endpoint, the local endpoint for our server that we can run locally. But I wanted to show you some of the APIs actually using this. And no big surprises here. It's .NET, it's C#. What are we going to use? Oh, hooray. I think we should use HTTP client. This is, yes. How else would you do it in .NET? And really beautiful here. There's a couple of things that are really fun to see. So we're going to instantiate our client. Good old modern .NET we'll use our using, so we clean up after ourselves for our disposables. And then this is really cool, system text JSON. So we can serialize our climate model object, encode it, and fire it over the wire. And then in this case, this example is set up to work with a local server. But of course, this is a great starting point if you want to hit another endpoint on a public API.
Yeah, and also notice that we're using system.text.json, something that is already readily available on desktop, on mobile. You already enabled to bring it over to Meadow. As Chris mentioned, there are some limitations on memory, so there are some things that you can't just go and get a Unity NuGet packages, just jam it there and run Halo or things like that. We have to be also very we need to keep things in the lightweight side of things. So using things as the Newton JSON stuff, which is a JSON serializer that's way more popular, it might bring a lot of things that the Meadow won't need, but it will be eating much of your memory in that case. So we keep things light. We use system.text.json for this reason. And And also we don't have any linking yet, so we are also bringing all the output files of things that we might not be using at the moment. But then once we have the linked in approach, we'll be able to just remove all those unused files, and then we can have better use of our memory. So.
Yeah, very well said, and exactly as Jorge said, it's not always the libraries, but it's the dependencies in those libraries, and so things like Newton's.json has a big dependency tree, and it will pull a lot of content in. Linker, for those who are not familiar, it's a technique of effectively removing parts of libraries and code that you're not using. And so it's a tool that will run through and actually crawl the dependencies and see the code usage in your code, and can actually remove big chunks of libraries, sometimes even libraries altogether if they're things that are just not being used in your code. And that's being worked on, and that should really help compatibility. So if you run into memory problems, storage problems, future versions of Meadow should address that. But really exciting, because system text JSON is something we had to do a little bit of work on in terms of how we handled the base class libraries to enable in Meadow v6. And so it's really exciting to see that working nicely here. So with the networking story, again, it's .NET, it's HTTP client. We can send data over the wire. We can fetch readings back from our server as well. And so again, not a whole lot of surprises here. A few things you need to do to get this working in your application. You need to set up your Wi-Fi. Jorge showed you another new feature in beta 6, where you can put it in the config file and have Meadow automatically fire up your Wi-Fi and connect with your credentials. You use that config file. I'll show you the other way here as well. And let me go with the right spot here. Perfect. So I'm back in the HackKit version of our Klima code. And there's an initialize Wi-Fi method here. We've separated out the Wi-Fi initialization. And there's a little bit of fun stuff here. I'll talk about this here in a second, just because it's a little bit of fun C# code. But the important part for Wi-Fi is this right here. Remember we talked about the device class earlier? This is the class, the object that understands the exact hardware, right? This knows the F7 hardware, and then it's able to talk to that companion. There's actually a companion microcontroller on board, the ESP32, that controls networking and Bluetooth. You don't have to worry about that because it's all hidden, abstracted in those APIs, but we do want to tell it to connect to our Wi-Fi network. In this case here, we pass in the Wi-Fi name, Wi-Fi password. Again, probably going forward, the preferred method is going to be using that config file, but both paths are available. And then again, of course, it's a modern API. Notice that we are awaiting. This is a task returning method. It returns a connection result. We can test that status and just make sure it's successful and see if it passed or failed. Now, since I'm here, I feel obligated to show you just a little bit of code here. This is just some fun stuff, slightly off topic for networking. But we put in a little wait cursor. And is my camera still working? It's not on screen. No, actually, the battery on my camera. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But
I can show that in mine if you want.
Beautiful. I'll just walk through the code here. And if you feel like
sure.
Great. But what's fun here, again, really showing you that we are using a modern API. Now, in this case here, we've got a task running, and then we're doing some async calls. Notice our modern pattern matching, really fancy switch statements in C#. And what we're doing here is we're updating, well, just a string. But we're using that string to update our on-screen text. And what we're able to do here is actually put a little animating ellipsis while we're waiting for that Wi-Fi to connect, to give that feedback back to the user. Again, when you're using the HackKit version, we've got your display going. And so again, just that visual cue. Out in the wild, if we're looking in low power environments, well, we may not want to do that, but it's fun that we have those capabilities. And it shows a couple of other things that are interesting about Meadow, in that we're able to do things like update the UI in a task. We don't have to go back to the core of the main thread in order to update the UI, because we're just talking to the hardware over those hardware communication channels. And then just a little bit of fun modern C#. So we update this, and then what we do is when this comes back, once we've connected to our Wi-Fi network, in this case we use the cancellation token, we cancel out, and we end that animation. So again, good old C#, lots of familiar things. But I want to talk a little bit about Maple. And Jorge, let me know if you want to throw anything up on screen.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, for those who doesn't know about Maple, we already have a board that's able to connect to your Wi-Fi. So the next step would be, All right, if we want to get data from Meadow, what would be the next step? So go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so this has been around for a while, and this is a really lightweight, built for IoT, built for Meadow, lightweight web server. Now, for those of you that have been around the ecosystem for a while, there was a version of Maple running back on NetDuino. And this is really, we've modernized that web server. And you're gonna see it now, it's coming in, you see it right here, support for system text JSON. And it's really meant to give a similar API surface, something like ASP.NET, but with a much, much, much smaller footprint and much, much, much lower memory requirements. Again, built for IoT. This is still a work in progress. It's working beautifully. We're going to see more features evolve as the platform evolves, but there's some interesting new features around routing. But again, it's a lightweight web service. So let's see what it looks like to bring that into a project. So over to our HackKit version. Jorge talked about this earlier. We talked about Meadow Foundation. Way you bring this in, well, we bring it in via NuGet packages, modern .NET environment. See if I can get this to scroll over nicely. Beautiful. And in this case here, we have Meadow Foundation Web Service, Maple Web Server. So let's have a look at how we would wire this all up. And in this case, I believe we have this all. Jorge wrote this for me, put this all together last night. So thank you very much, Jorge. Fantastic. And a beautiful, make sure it's the right class. The temperature request handler class here. Now, what's important about this is this derives from request handler base. Again, we see some similar patterns here, and we can do it. Take a quick little poke here. And we've got our listener context and a few other common things, like our send. And of course, it's driving from iDisposable as we would expect. But then it's great. We just attribute our methods. In this case here, we're going to expose an HTTP GET. We define our get temperature method, and then that does a little bit of work. There's some convenience here. We're going to toggle the LED on the board to give us a status indicator. It'll go magenta when the request comes in. And then we're going to build up our data and store it off, and then put our color back to green. And so I'm going to run this. I'm going to fire this up right now. I'm going to hit deploy. And what's fun about this is, so as this is deploying, I'm going to switch over to a modern web browser. And let me see here. Let me make sure I'm deploying to the right spot. And Control-Shift-M. I've been going back and forth on various boards. Should be COM14. I believe that's right. Let's hit deploy. There we go. And that's actually a nice little tip too, is sometimes when you're deploying, it's never a bad idea to reset your board in between deploys, especially for someone like me who's writing a lot of test and debug code. And so if my code crashes and puts my Meadow board in a bad state, hit that reset before you deploy. Not that we as .NET developers ever make mistakes, but it could happen from time to time. So this is going to initialize. I'll show you in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see it's going through. It's going to instantiate our temperature sensor, display controller. It's going to get the Wi-Fi. We saw that code earlier. But what this is going to do is going to fire up our web server. And we're going to watch for one thing really important. So right now, it's actually awaiting. I showed that code. And it's actually animating that little ellipsis on my display. I can hold it up on camera. You probably won't be able to see too much of it. But we're going to wait for that to complete, wait for that Wi-Fi detection to be finished. And then that's going to spin up our Maple server. And what's amazing about that now is we can use REST to grab data from our board. Now I'm going to show you how to do that with the web browser, and then I pass over to Jorge, who's going to show you how to do that with a modern .NET application. And it's a mobile app.
Yeah, and notice again that we're doing the unitization here as well. That whenever we're getting the request, we are just doing temperature controller, we get the value, and then we return it in Celsius in this case. Eventually, we can put flags, and if you want to do a request, you can pass in a parameter in what unit you want to bring it. You can bring it in Fahrenheit or even in Kelvin. The possibilities are just endless. I I try to have the tendency of showing minimal projects so people can understand. I think it's best than giving them a whole rocket ship of code there. Yeah.
So let me just zoom in here and just show you. So here's our address, 192.168.182 on port 5417. So that's exactly where we're going to go. And again, our HTTP attribute, get temperature. So that's our endpoint, get temperature. Going to run that. Did I make a typo? Let's see what I did.
Get temperature. I think should be fine.
Don't say what to do. Well, I might pass over to you. I'm sure I've made a typo.
Sure.
But yeah, why don't you show it on the mobile app? I will fix it on my side, and I will have this working for y'all in just a moment. But again, I think it's a typo, but it is just hitting that API endpoint.
Cool. All right. If you can share my screen, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So Adrian already gave you the rundown of how to use, how to connect to Wi-Fi, and how to start Maple is something also that's really important, and I think something worth mentioning. We have a Maple server field here that the way we instantiate it is passing in, newing up Maple to create the object, pass in the IP address of where your board is connected, which is right this little field that is already accessible, and we pass in a port to communicate. And this is a really cool feature that we're including on Maple. So sometimes if we are running our Meadow board and it doesn't have a display, then it will give me an address, but like, how am I able to pick up this address so I can connect to it? Well, we have this thing called discovery mode or advertise. And what it'll do is your device will start broadcasting the Maple server name along with its IP address. So other devices that are listening using our NuGet Maple client that'll be running on your app, it'll be able to pick up this UDP message and say, oh, I found a Maple server. And then it'll grab the IP address and you'll be ready to go, and you'll be using Maple, just start sending requests without no need of going into your code and writing down the IP address and the port. But you have that option if you want to put it on your application, but it's a convenience of being able to just discover your board across your Wi-Fi network. So let me plug this in. Connect here my little Klima Hackett project. All right, let's see if we can. Let me zoom in here. Maybe we might be lucky to see the ellipsis going. And there's a lot of stuff happening on this Klima Hackett. We have push buttons running here. We have the temperature sensor. We have the display running. We have SQLite running as well. We have monitoring climate change using the analog temperature sensor. So we're using the observable React approach. And so there you can see those little ellipses there. Adrian cleverly put them as giving us some feedback that is actually joining a network. I normally just, if I don't have display, I just make the LED pulse a different color every time through the initialization until it reaches screen to give me a feedback that the app is ready to go. So we have to wait a few moments to join the network, and then it'll start the Maple server as well. And normally I think it'll be bound to get faster, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening on the app.
Absolutely. And I can confirm, I diagnosed within the background, I missed the colon on HTTP. So it's working beautifully on the endpoint.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. So there you go. It says Wi-Fi connected. It starts sensing right away the sensor, the analog temperature sensor. So my room temperature here is 20 to 23 degrees Celsius. And if I start the application now, I have it right here, but I'm just going to show visor, so I need to let's put it on Visor, next by, here is my phone. And then if I run the Klima app again, we can now go into the other app version of the app or approach is the Hackett version. So I click Hackett version. It has the Maple client running, and it'll start listening to UDP broadcasts. And there you go. It picked up the new Maple server running, which is, the guy right here is right next to the phone. And immediately after connecting, is just going to query, give me your temperature data right now. And it's also giving me the date and time. So if I do a pull and refresh here for the list view, it's just going to throw in another request, and it'll just giving you the same current data over and over again, populating the list view. I'm not sure what happened there. It was going well. Yeah. So basically, yeah, that was basically the gist of it. I can show you the code of how the discovery
on the
happens.
client side, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go to the Hackett view model, and here we have our server model. It's something that we have. It has an IP address and the name of the server, and we also have the reload temperature log. That's when I do a pull and refresh. It's going to do the temperature, get the temperature logs, and that's going to make the it's going to do a client, which is the Maple client that I was talking about, that you'll be able to install on your client applications. So you can just do a regular GET request and just pass in that endpoint that Adrian was mentioning, get temperature. And once we get the temperature back, we do a JSON convert, we just serialize it, and we can add it finally into the list view. And here is how we normally we scan for some clients, some servers. We do start scanning for advertising devices. So if I can find any after a while, I just show a server list empty. And if I actually find some servers, then I can just pick, and I just put the first one by default. And I have a server collection change, which will be an event that is triggered for every server that I pick up via the broadcast on UDP. So yeah, that was basically what I wanted to show you here.
That's beautiful. So that means that we could actually have multiple Meadow devices running Maple, and we could connect to those devices through this client application. Really cool demo.